Hey, what's going on YouTube and the Gospel Gambit Chess School community? My name's Kevin, aka Gospel Gambit, and I want to welcome you guys in for another special YouTube video. I had the opportunity last night, Wednesday, to play in the new quad for the Knights of South Florida. Quad meaning a 4-week tournament where you play one game each night. Because it was a new quad, all the pairings were completely randomized. From looking at the spreadsheet, it looks like they went down the list with all the highest rated players on one side, and then you backfilled with the rest of the remaining players to start the matchups. This gave me a great opportunity to play a much higher rated opponent than me and to learn a lot. Played against Otis, who's also one of the members who runs the organizations at the Knights of South Florida. As you can see, it was a 65-minute game with a 5-second delay. After last Wednesday's game that I posted a review on, we did jump up about 7 rating points. We were sitting at 1528. Otis is almost 600 points higher than me at 2099. Kind of head into this game when I saw I had white. Obviously, when playing an opponent 600 points higher, you just hope to play your best game and to learn the most from it. And we'll dive into the game here in a second. But it was a great opportunity. The Knights of South Florida have a wide range of all different ratings and players. So I'm really looking forward to the weeks to come to playing players of all different skill levels and trying out the opening repertoire that I've kind of built here on YouTube as well as the Gospel Gambit community. So we did get one of our opening repertoires today. I think against a higher rated opponent, if I had two options, I would have liked a Evans Gambit or a Smith-Morra Gambit. They offer a little bit more complexity, as the Scotch Gambit that we go into today is not the most complex opening when it comes down to it. If your opponent is well booked up or they just play some solid moves, it can be very even going into the middle game, where the Evans Gambit and the Smith-Morra Gambit can have a lot sharper lines overall, but we got to play against what our opponent plays against us. So without further ado, now let's hop into the game. I did get the opportunity after the game to speak with Otis for a little while and kind of go over certain moves. I plugged the game into the engine as well here, and I also looked at one of my chessable courses by National Master Han Schut. He's a great teacher for the club level. He's got some great chessable courses for like $5 as well, going over the Scotch and Evans Gambit with I think 30 lines or less in each of those chessable courses, so very digestible. And I didn't follow through with one of the lines that he suggested, and you'll see why that kind of turns into not such a good situation here moving forward. But again, I just want to say thanks to Otis for hosting the event as well as having an awesome game. So of course we start with e4, and Otis responded with e5, knight f3, knight c6. I was feeling pretty confident, at least getting this setup here with our classic Italian looking like setup. At this point, we can go into the Evans Gambit on bishop to c5, or the Scotch Gambit after knight to f6. So I didn't feel like I was wasting too much time here out of the opening. Of course we play d4. Otis takes there, he takes d, and we push pawn to e5. Now, I believe the Scotch Gambit can be pretty solid weapon below maybe the 2000 level, maybe 1900 over the board rating. Obviously, it does still pretty well online. I was taking a peek here. These are McKnight that was my main account that I had for a while here on Lee Chess, and you can see. We have a 62% win rate over 133 games, so it does score fairly well for white if black doesn't know what they're doing. The main move is d5. We've seen that in almost about 40 games. It scores pretty close to 50-50. A lot of players maybe that aren't booked up from the black side play this move knight to g4, thinking that they can recover the pawn, but it's a lot more difficult than that, as we have the option to castle, and if black greedily takes the pawn, we can take back and pin their knight against their king, play f4, and win that second knight back with a slight advantage going into the middle game. And you can see all these other just random moves that, you know, black plays. Queen e7, definitely don't suggest that as for black players. Putting your queen opposite your king here. We're one move away to get castled and put our rook here on the e-file. But it does score well. Like I said, I mean, I'm sitting here at 2,000 on Lead Chess. If we go over to the Gospel Gambit account here on Lead Chess, you can see again, you know, we're scoring 2 out of 3 games on the G4 lines, 100% on these random moves here, and struggling a little bit against the D5, the mainline move. So that's probably where I got to brush up a little bit here moving forward. But again, still a solid weapon, but against someone of Otis's caliber, maybe it's not the right move. So of course, D5 is the mainline move, and bishop to B5, that's just a move you got to know as white to play here. We do not en passant, and we do not take this knight on F6. Now here's the crossroads. The main variation is knight to E4, and I'm a little bit more booked up on that variation. I believe I might have had a little bit better opportunities with this variation personally. It allows usually for some nice F and E pawns coming down the board that are supporting each other as we try to assault black's king. But lately, and I've seen this a couple times now, especially online, is this knight to D7 move. Haven't really looked too deep into it besides running a quick engine analysis after one of my games recently, and it really only helped me through maybe the next couple moves. The key idea here is that we do have the option to castle. We really shouldn't take this knight just yet. If black, so after we castle here, which is the move, black does not have the option to take this pawn just yet, as either knight that moves, the other knight's going to be pinned to black's king. So, for example, if they take the pawn, we can just take that knight right away, and it works for the other knight, of course, as well. We can simply take it and win a piece. So, of course, black's just going to continue their development here and play bishop to e7. This is following right along the lines, and like I said, that one chessable course that I followed. And we do take this knight here now to ruin black's pawn structure a bit, as well as we want to win this pawn back on d4. So after takes, we take the pawn back, and the main move here is knight to takes e5. Now at this point, I was feeling fairly confident. What do we have? 1, 2, 7. So we're still down a pawn, but I felt confident that I could at least win maybe the c pawn back and go into the middle game even material. That is what it happens into the game, and for the most part, I'll scroll down here a little bit. You can see we held a nice maybe a -1 advantage for black throughout the middle game, so it wasn't a terrible option, kind of what I went forward with here. I did end up playing the move f4, trying to get a bit aggressive, trying to follow a little bit of like what I said that old mainline move is, where usually black takes this knight and puts it on e4 instead, and you have this pawn duo that you try to push down the board and really disrupt black's king. I thought with the move f4 that if we could dislodge the knight, well, we could take here on c6. Obviously, I'm weakening the dark squares from my king, so that's one thing I have to be concerned about. If black can get a quick bishop out to make sure that I don't lose my knight here. And it's kind of the right idea, it's just the wrong piece. So I'm going to quickly go over what the mainline move here, I guess you could call it, that still keeps white with a slight advantage. As you can see, we have about a +3 to, or +0.3 to +0.5 advantage here. So the mainline move is bishop to f4 here, hitting this knight. And black has a few different options. The line in the chessable course kind of goes c5, which is, I believe, the top computer move, c5. And here we do take the knight on e5. Black takes our knight, And we don't pick up this d4 pawn right away. Actually, you'll see here in a second. We take this pawn on g7, kind of ruining black's pawn structure over on the king side. And after rook to g8, we don't come back and take the pawn. We just bring our bishop back to e5. And at this situation, we have about a half pawn advantage, according to the computer, at a relatively decent depth. That was at 26 depth here. Now, the reason that we don't end up taking the pawn is because if we do take the pawn here on d4, black has this nice bishop to h3. All of a sudden, there's way too much pressure here on the g2 square. We might be losing our rook if we have to push the move g3, and that kind of makes our kingside collapse. We still have our rook and knight on the queen side that haven't been developed yet. We have to get those guys into the game. Our queen is still a little bit off sides. We don't really want to use it as a defender here and trade a queen for a rook and a bishop. So it gets a bit awkward. That's why we don't take that second pawn. We play bishop to e5 so that in the event that black does play bishop to h3, we can slide our bishop back to g3. Black has to waste another tempo moving this light squared bishop, and we have a super solid structure here in front of our king, and we can go try to fight for some of these weakened pawns in black structure. So from here, this is where the line kind of stops on the chessable course. If we did get this in the game, I would have had a little bit better fighting opportunities, I think. So that's just one of the lessons for some of the club players here. If you're going to study all these kind of moves and then see the one line that maybe you haven't looked at too recently. Like I said, this move knight to d7, I haven't seen it that often, both online or over the board. So I haven't really just put that much time into studying. So we'll go back to how the game went. You just got to do the best that you can do and really take your time and think. Again, this was a 65-minute game with a 5-second delay before the time started ticking. So I did have a decent amount of time throughout most of the game. I didn't feel like I was being rushed or that we had any difficult decisions just yet. Here would have been the first fork in the road, I think, and I kind of stumbled along with the move f4. Is it completely losing? No, but giving a player that's 600 points higher than you a slight advantage already is definitely usually not the way you want to go in games. So Otis responded with c5, and at this point we trade knights. I was feeling fairly good. I knew that at this point, while we were going to be able to pick up this d4 pawn, again we just had to make sure that we didn't have any pins coming along our this dark squared diagonal at our king. And I felt pretty good about having this e5 pawn. It's a very intrusive pawn into black's side of the board. And black's always going to have to kind of be worried about it. It restricts some of the defense here on d6 and f6. Black's position can be a little cramped, but black is able to work around it. And as you can see, I end up taking the pawn on d4. Black castles. We play knight to c3. And black plays the move bishop to e5. The only reason that the computer gives us a slight mistake was the computer really wants to play this move c5, and we'll see this in a few different moves here coming up. Eventually, we do get c5 in the game, and I thought it was coming a lot quicker personally than it eventually did. We don't end up getting the move c5 until move 18, so about 6 moves from now. But it was always a move that I had to keep calculating, make sure that c5 didn't make my personal center collapse. After bringing our knight out to c3, we got to make sure that c5 and d4 doesn't totally roll us down in the center of the board. So those were some of the ideas that I was thinking about. It wants like c5 and some play like this, but I don't think it's a huge thing to worry about. So we take knight to c3, bishop to e6, and I here play bishop to e2. Now the computer likes this move knight to a4 which wasn't even on my radar. It's a move, the more I look at it, and more it makes sense. And, obviously knights on the rim are grim, things like those. I really didn't even look at it. I was more looking at moves where after black plays c5 now, can I move my queen over to move squares like f4 or f2? I was more looking at retreating moves for my queen instead of trying to lock down this c5 square with my own pieces. So instead of bishop to d2 here, it really wants to move knight to a4 with the idea that, if black plays the move, let's say rook over to b8, well, we can even put our own knight here on c5 and entice black maybe into trading off their dark squared for our knight, or have black kind of have to play around our knight. Maybe we can pick up this light squared bishop here on e6, but using our own pieces to kind of clog up this c5 square is definitely kind of an idea I'll take for myself personally moving forward, and hopefully use in some of my future games. So this, like I said, this idea never crossed my mind, so I wasn't even thinking about that. I was mainly just worried about getting my pieces developed, and after this position, I was feeling, let's say, fairly good. At a nice central pawn. Black's position looks a little cramped. We're even material. I was feeling okay about that. I have a nice half-open file for my f-rook, and my goal now was to see if I could migrate my pieces over to the king side. One of the biggest issues here, as you guys can probably see, is that black's bishops are just cutting across our king side, and it makes it very difficult for where we want to put our pieces later on in the game. Like this light squared bishop is cutting out all these squares, and black's dark squared bishop, along with their queen, cuts out all of these squares. So it makes it difficult to, slide our queen over to either of these squares. We would love to rook lift over here to like the h3 square to put some pressure. So these bishops were really annoying. And that's why it kind of makes sense, maybe this knight a4 to c5 move with the idea of possibly getting rid of one of these bishops allows us to play a little bit easier on the light squares around black's king. Here I just played the move b3. We get some similar structures like this in the other main line Scotch Gambit, where black's knight is on e4. So usually the structure is fairly solid. It can resist the pawn pushes fairly okay from blacks for when black starts rolling down the queen side here. And after the move b6, I didn't take this move, or I didn't see the depth of this move and how serious it was, especially later on in the game, as you'll see. But for anybody that's been following like my Leonhardt Gambit videos as well, it does a lot of the similar ideas. Like this rook lift was a really nice idea by black, and not only does it start putting pressure on either the c file or the a file if he wants to go back and forth, which we will see, but it's a huge defender of this 6th rank. In my head, I'm like, oh, black's got to be worried about the 7th rank, but the 6th rank is where I'm hoping to play on the f6 square. There's ideas of if we can get a rook or queen here, maybe we get a bishop to the h6 square. And this rook just does a great job of being a sideways defender and supporter, coming from the queen side all the way to the king side. And, we get similar ideas like that in the Leonhardt Gambit, where after we give away our b pawn, all of a sudden our rook's here on b3, and it's sliding into the attack on black's king. So very similar ideas, a great move by my opponent. Again, the engine just wants us to go knight to a4. It really wants us to get into this c5 square. And with black moving their rook up to b6, now we have some tempo to kind of play with here against black's position. I played a few moves with the computer here, but I was nowhere close to being to finding any of this over the board, if I'm being completely honest. My goal is to kind of just get my rook stacked here, and again, just bring my pieces over to the king side of the board and start chipping away. I thought I was slowly increasing my pieces position. Knight or rook to f3 here. This ends up being a pretty big mistake later on in the game, as my goal was a little bit to entice the c4 or c5 d4 move and get this e4 square for my knight here, as we have ideas of possibly sacking on f6 and sliding over, using a pawn. If we can get a pawn stabilized here on the f6 square, well, then black's king is wide open. But kind of the problem with some of this is that after c5 and d4, black's light squared bishop is going to have some nice pressure here along this light squared diagonal, and we'll kind of show you as we go further in the game here. So again, black gives us a threat that we have to deal with. Slides his rook over to c6. We simply sidestep. The computer either just wants us to bring our dark square bishop up or slide the queen back and just get out of any sort of pins altogether. I went with the more safe move in my head. Just get the king off of any sort of checks on the dark squares for even later on in the game. Tuck him away on h1. If black wants to go for this bishop to c4 or c5 square now, well, we can always head over to f4 or drop back to d3 here. So made sure that I had enough escape squares if black still ended up going for this dark square. Wasn't expecting it once I slid my rook, or once I slid my king over, as it just gets awkward. Black's pawn's a little bit backwards there, and bishop in front of the rook. Just seemed like an awkward position. Black slides over to a6. Again, you can see just kind of the eval. We're pretty much even going through here this middle game, slowly, feeling each other out, pressuring each other here and there. And I played the move here, a4. In my head, I was thinking, let's just get this pawn supported by b3. I can now bring my rook into the game, maybe to f1 or other squares if it needs to come over to e1 to support the pawn. It frees up this rook on a1 to get into the game and to start contributing. Obviously, black's rook has already started doing that here on the queen side, but I felt that we just needed more firepower here on the king side. a4, black doesn't have a b pawn to try to break into this structure. Obviously, there's c5, c4 possibly, but my idea is that if we can get enough firepower on the king side here, maybe giving up a pawn if need be on the queen side is not going to matter in the long run. And I knew that I didn't have to worry about this a4 pawn, at least in the short term. Again, black now strikes with the move c5. And at this point, I was feeling fairly good. I played the move queen f2, which is not the computer's friend here. It wants to move queen to d3, striking black's rook and kind of forcing it to move, and then sliding our rook over. I went with this move queen to f2, thinking that maybe we can triple up here on the f file and kind of do this move where if we get our knight into e4, we can sack the knight here on f6, and if we have enough firepower behind it after takes, we can either take back on f6 with a rook, or if black just wants to leave the pawn there, we have enough firepower behind the pawn to cement it there on f6. I thought, our queen's coming out here to g3, or our rook's coming over to g3, and possibly we have a nice mating attack on black's king. Of course, that's completely wrong. Again, peep the rook here on a6 as he becomes a big player here in the few moves to come. I bring the queen back. Black continues on with the pawns rolling down the middle of the board. And at this point, I play the move knight to e4. Now, playing over the board obviously is completely different than playing online, and just getting your vision used to where the pieces are, what's interacting with what. In my head, I completely missed after this move bishop to d5. As you can see, that the computer and Otis have already started almost a full piece advantage at this point. At this point, my vision had totally, I did not see anything in this quadrant of the board. Obviously, a lot of my calculations were with, the bishop is kind of blocking the rook's vision here on the 6th rank, and I didn't reprocess my brain here after this move bishop to d5, or when I was kind of building up my calculations. In my head, this square was still blocked up. I wasn't seeing this quarter of the board, and I'm thinking I'm loving life here. We have knight to f6 exclam, except that is for black exclam and not for white. I dove in here. If black's knight's here on e6, well then after pawn takes, black really can't take. They could take with the knight if they or with the bishop and just leave it like that, but that's super scary. Again, this is if black's bishop was back here on e6. If they wanted to, they could take, and then we can continue on. But just complete blunder here, and I resigned after this position. Black's rook slides right into the game, bringing a third defender where I only had 2 defenders in my pawn. My rook's falling next. I probably have to trade my rooks here. And we're just completely down a pawn. Or we're down a full piece. And even worse positional-wise, as black does have the bishop pair. So again, just a complete vision meltdown here, and what the move was going to be after this c5 to d4 maneuver. Really missing that the whole reason that this rook is so powerful here on the 6th rank is that it supports defending a lot of these moves of white trying to infiltrate along the 6th rank, trying to disrupt black's pawns in front of their king. It makes it very difficult. You can really see the power of the bishop pair in this game, where it's just taking away so many pieces or so many squares in front of black's king, where it's very difficult for white to kind of get an attack along any of those G or H files, and again even the F file here with my pieces. In the main line, like I said, you normally have a nice F pawn that supports this E pawn, so we're able to kind of use this pawn as a battering ram, and then after some takes here, we can sack one of the pawns and put it here on f6 with the other pawn. But with this variation that we went with today, obviously only having the one pawn makes it a lot more difficult to do a similar idea. And this move rook to f3 kind of just was not the move, as we're not able to really, if we ever give black this opportunity to use this d4 square for their light square bishop, it just forces us into a tough situation. We really can't use the e4 square for our knight with our rook here on f3, and vice versa. A couple other ideas that black also had was he also had the ability to use the 4th rank if he wanted to, depending on how the game went. Another just the power of having a half open file, especially with support of the bishops. Not only is he supporting the 6th rank here, but black's rook also has the opportunity to play along the 4th rank and really disrupt our pieces with the support of the dark squared bishop. So this rook was kind of the key player of the game for black, along with the bishop pair. And at first I thought all these rook moves were not necessarily tempo wasters, but they were kind of probes, and I thought that I was dealing with them okay, but it really just shows my understanding of the position was not where it needed to be in order to play this sort of position against someone that's 600 points higher than me. But I really appreciate Otis kind of going and talking with me after the game. We kind of broke down some of the ideas again of possibly this rook and where the power was. At the end of the day, I feel pretty confident, at least with how I played the early to middle game. As you can see, up to move 17, 18, we were holding anywhere from a -1 to minus half point advantage with a great player. Really a humble guy, really just played a great game. He said he used to play some of the Scotch Gambit back in his days when he was kind of coming up the rating ladder as well. So it gives me hope that we can continue building on this opening and continue to learn more openings here in the future. It just shows you, though, like you study a few different openings as a club level player as you're kind of moving up the ladder, and you have to be ready for all sorts of variations that are kind of going to come over the board. Again, I was able to find that bishop to f4 variation, but I hadn't studied it in a couple of years now. So a good instructive moment to know about, especially as I've been seeing this knight to d7 move a little bit more often. So bishop to f4, and we get to continue our slight advantage here for white, at least heading into the middle game. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. We're going to have a couple weeks off as we head into the Christmas season here. I wish everybody a happy holiday and Merry Christmas. Hopefully you guys enjoy some chess with your family or friends over the holidays. And we'll be having more of these review videos coming out after the start of the new year. Wednesday Night Chess will continue here in South Florida. There's also a nice big tournament, the Delray Open, that will be happening in Florida as well, here starting in January. If you live in the area, please go check out that online. You can easily find it just with a Google search. And we'll continue with our opening guides. If this is your first video here on the channel, we have 2 opening guides going over the Leonhardt Gambit as well as the Scorpion Horus Gambit, which is a really interesting gambit against the Caro-Kann defense. It's an opening that black only sees 0.05% of games. So it's a really sneaky opening that you can pull out against the Caro-Kann. I break down the numbers in those 3 videos, so go ahead and watch those. I appreciate you guys. If you could like and subscribe. If you like these videos and opening guides, join us over on skool.com. That's SKOOL.com. We have a community of chess improvers all trying to get better right around the club level, supporting each other. I put out content to that community to try to help people and elevate their game and help people with game reviews and all sorts of chess related things. Have a wonderful Christmas, guys. God bless.